The NFL Summer Series continues. I've finished the AFC and now I move on to the NFC. Today, I'm happy to present in PowerPoint format the NFC East. And let me tell you what a difference a year makes, because last year, if you went under for all four of these teams' season totals, Philadelphia mostly 11.5 flat, the Giants, Washington, Dallas, you would have been 4-0. You would have swept the board because all four teams went under their win totals. I had three of them under the win totals, and I wish I had Dallas too, knowing what I knew then, but you couldn't bet all four, right? But it turned out to be that way. I'm going to be painting a different picture this time around because I'm pretty bullish on the NFC East. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about the NFC East, starting alphabetically with the Dallas Cowboys. As usual, with the PowerPoint, I'll start off with their stat sheet. Matt Eberflus, who we all know was the architect of 70% defenses when he was in Indianapolis. Well, he went to Dallas, and we shouldn't have expected anything to be any different, especially with injuries starting the season with Dallas's secondary. And this is what you got. 68.5% pass defense, 4.7 yards per carry. Did they improve during the year? No, 37 points per game, last five in 2025. Immediately when I see this stat and I write these things out, I'm looking to see what's going to take place in August and September. Immediately it comes to mind, I want to take some notes. Will this change now that Dallas has changed defensive coordinators? So again, I'm always looking for that edge, looking to see something that I can hang my hat on that'll be different from one year to the next, positive or negative with any team. Free agency, they added some depth, which is necessary. They wish they had it last year because of injuries. Maybe not impact, but they did add along the defensive line, and they added a little bit to the secondary, and they're healthier coming into this year in the secondary. Schedule-wise, third toughest schedule, and there's no easy stretch. If you look at the schedule, no easy stretch. The good news, there's always good news and bad news with most of these teams. They're going to get some rest differential, and that's not bad. Considering Dallas is America's team, they always play primetime schedules. It's nice to also have this plus 12 rest differential. That might come into play, balance out a little bit that tough schedule. This was a top 10 class for Dallas. Dallas usually drafts well in the first few rounds and then peters out, but this draft was pretty good. Trio of defensive ends, nobody with necessarily major impact status. I wasn't high on Lawrence, for example. I think he's more of a middle second round pick than a first round pick. However, they made a slight move up from 12 to 11 to get Caleb Downs, and I think that was an outstanding move. One of my favorite players in the entire draft. He will clean up mistakes made by linebackers and other cornerbacks and so on as they develop. I think this is an outstanding move and instantly upgrades Dallas in the secondary. Pretty good draft overall. Unanswered questions. How much improvement will we see on defense? If Dak Prescott and his group continue to perform at the level they did, all they're asking Dallas to do is be at league average, not 30th, 31st, or 32nd. And they were 32nd in a lot of categories last year. So basically what you're hoping is that they're just league average and they'll be fine. The schedule, can they navigate it? Again, it's a top 3 schedule. It's a primetime schedule. They'll have those rest differential, but that comes into play 3 or 4 times. Is the coaching staff up to it? Can there be that spike in terms of defensive numbers? I think the team goal is to win the NFC East. I think they see Philadelphia as vulnerable. I think that's the team goal. My goal, because I'm so bullish on this whole division, is to say instead, let's make sure those last 2 games of the year, those last 2 divisional games are meaningful. Let's make sure, if I'm Dallas, that they control their own destiny. That would be my goal for them. The win total opened 8.5, and based on their draft, free agency, the coaching changes, I think everything came into play. And even though it's slanted to the under, you're seeing mostly 9.5 for the win total now. So gone are the days of most of the 8.5s. My power rating, 25.7 again is about my league average, if you heard me on other podcasts. So 27 is above the league average. It kind of evens out to about 9.5 where they are. So I don't see any value in terms of where my power rating is. If I see defensive improvement, then that power rating will move up. All this power rating is what should it be at week 1. It's not trying to tell you where it's going to be at week 12. That'll manifest itself over the course of the season. I just want to know where I should put the number at week 1. This is where I have them right now. And I do think they're improved from last year. I do think the defensive coordinator change will make a difference. And I will be keeping an eye in August and September on their early defensive numbers. We move on to the New York Giants. Historically, this team starts slow. They're not good against the spread. They miss the playoffs, and they have an offensive line that nobody likes. And that's what we see in the stat sheet, 48 sacks allowed. In prime time, against the spread, and most of the time, remember, they're going to be underdogs in prime time. So they're not winning these games. They're not even covering these games. 3 out of their last 22, they covered. They're not primetime darlings by any means. And their run defense the last 4 years means they're not getting off the field either. They're allowing all these sacks, and they're not getting off the field. They're playing from behind a lot. The staff is upgraded. Say what you want about John Harbaugh, and I've said plenty about how his late game management in the first half, late game management, late half management, in the second half, late half management, not good. However, their attention to detail, their ability to upgrade themselves on special teams, because that's Harbaugh's, that's where he came from, special teams, way back 2 decades ago. I think this is a staff upgrade, and the attention to detail, I think, will be noticeable. The free agency added talent, which some of these teams, they're going to add talent because there wasn't talent to begin with. Because of very small draft classes, the Giants haven't added depth, and a lot of times they haven't added talent. So they've been able to upgrade the talent, both in the defensive secondary, very important for them, and at tight end. 7th toughest schedule. Part of the schedule toughness, because I use my power ratings to determine schedule strength, is a belief that this division is better as well. But it's the 7th toughest schedule based on who they play, what divisions they play. But it is a nicely placed bye week. So I don't think fatigue will be a factor. No plus or minus rush differential. Not bad by Giant standards, because the last 2 years they've had very rough patches. Top 10 draft class. They updated that offensive guard with pick number 10. They chose him over Caleb Downs. I'm sure that was a discussion in the room, but everything changed when they got linebacker Reese at pick 5, who a lot of people thought would be gone by even pick 2. The Jets had a decision to make, and then pick 3 and 4, he could have been gone. Instead, he was there at pick 5, and then it altered what they wanted to do, because they have a young quarterback and you want to protect your young quarterback. They decided to go offensive line. I'm not going to quibble with that at all. Malachi Fields, the 3rd round draft choice, was well liked by a lot. I was not as high on him, but for this team who needed a taller target, he fits, and he potentially has that wide receiver 2 label on him here. Not much competition really for wide receiver 2, but I think he can develop into that. I highlighted Colton Hood, which I think is an upgrade, one of the best cornerbacks in this draft class. I had about 24 to 26 people with first round grades in this last draft. You never get to 32 in a draft class, and it wasn't an overly deep draft class, but Colton Hood was given by me and others a first round draft grade. And here he goes at 37. So this is a pretty good draft class. Again, not a huge class for them. 7 is about the most you get, because they get trigger happy, but it is a good class. So I think they upgraded both in free agency and in the draft. Now I want to see whether the run defense will improve. I'm not sure Reese out of Ohio State Yeah, he's a man without a position to start out with. I think they're going to use him more at linebacker rather than rush edge to start, but he can play many hats. I don't know whether he himself improves the run defense or the coaching staff, Harbaugh's emphasis on run defense. I think that might make the difference, but we have to look and see. And every year we see 1-4 starts, 0-4, 1-5. By the time mid-October rolls around, the Giants are out of the picture. 1 year in the last several, 7 or 8, have they started with any kind of a pulse. I think, and we know John Harbaugh's track record in the preseason. At one point with Baltimore, what did they win? Something or cover 20 straight games in the preseason. So he's in it to win it right from the start. I expect the Giants and their coaching staff to instill that let's get out of the gate fast attitude. I think there's going to be a difference. Again, I'm bullish on this whole division. Goal for me is making the tough games at the end of the year meaningful. Again, being in that playoff picture, not being out of it by mid-October, but continuing to be in it. And I think their goal, not so secretly with Harbaugh there, is they'd like to win a wild card berth. They'd like to get that 6th or 7th seed. We'll see if that's possible. Their win total is a solid 7.5, more than it has been in the last couple of years. My power rating is still, when we start year one for John Harbaugh, September, first game of the year, I can't just bump it up and say they're a playoff team, 25.5 or 26. They have to grow together. Dart's a pretty young quarterback. He has to learn how to play within the pocket. Neighbors is coming off an injury. A couple of other players are coming off injury. We have to see how the offensive line and the defensive line develop. And of course, they're still going to be young in the secondary. 23.5, which is higher than some of the other teams I've been mentioning. So they start off below average in terms of my power ratings, but a chance to grow it. Obviously, we talked about the 1-5 starts. The pacing is good weeks 1 to 13. So that's not going to be an excuse. And as a special teams guy who values special team, you could steal a win or two if your special team play improves. And I think John Harbaugh will be cognizant of that. And he's put together a unit that I think will be better. Situational indicators have the needle moving up. I don't think you can fade them like we did last year. We're at the halfway point here. Don't have any comments or questions. But if you have any comments or questions, if I make any errors like I did on the last broadcast, please point them out. If you like what you see, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And again, please go ahead and tell others. I don't like to just be talking to myself, although some of these tidbits, maybe you don't want to pass around if you value them. But regardless, go ahead and share if you find these interesting. Philadelphia last year sweated the under. They got lucky early, and then they were in a position to get over their 11.5 win total late, but they lost that last meaningless game of the season to Washington, which I did appreciate. They had a very good year. I know they were down on their offensive coordinator and they fired their offensive coordinator. And I know Jalen Hurts is now not considered a top 5, 7, or even a top 10 quarterback. And there were chemistry issues with A.J. Brown feeding him the ball. And there wasn't a number 3 wide receiver. But all that taken into account, this was still, especially defensively, with the number 1 defense, it's tough to complete a pass against the Eagles. So if you're trying to come from behind against Philadelphia, good luck. It was hard to do. Now, after free agency, and of course, during the draft and June 1st, we saw A.J. Brown leave, but it was a foregone conclusion. We all knew, based on the way they handled the draft and free agency, that they're rebuilding the wide receiver unit, that A.J. Brown wasn't going to be there. They also lost a linebacker, but they like to go too deep, especially on the front 4, but even in the front 7. So they had pieces waiting to take the place of linebacker Dean. And they did add another defensive back to strengthen that unit. I like the schedule in terms of difficulty. Of course, they're the first place team with a higher power rating. So they're going to have a better schedule than their rivals. But what they don't have better than their rivals is this -15 rest deficit. Put that into perspective. That's 27 days difference between Dallas's plus 12 and Philadelphia's minus 15. So Philadelphia has to be better than they were last year in order to have the same success that they had last year. And last year they won 11 games. They have to be better to win 11 games this year. That's my opinion. And they're facing tougher competition because their NFC East rivals have stocked their roster. Their draft was varied, and it was a good draft. It was just outside of my top 10. The trade for Grinnard, the linebacker, puts them into the kind of B minus range. Eli Stowers is the guy that I highlighted here. He's the tight end that probably 15 other teams should have found a way to choose. Now, Eli Stowers at this point in his career, which is 0 in the NFL, is by far not a blocker. But he is camera ready to stretch the field out of Vanderbilt right now. He can catch 40 or 50 passes as a rookie right now at pick 54. I'm just shocked that other teams took tight ends that had nowhere close to the pass catching skill that Stowers have. As they wind down with their current tight end, they signed him just to a 1-year contract. I could see Stowers being the lead guy in 2027 and being part of a 2 tight end formation as everybody's kind of morphing to more 2 tight end formations, and make him the move tight end in 2026. Excellent pick by them. They filled in some gaps along the way, especially at safety at 244, 2 offensive linemen. And remember, those offensive linemen that Philly has, great ones, the starters, all pros, potential Hall of Famers, but they're getting way up there in age. So I like the fact that they're doing some succession planning there. Good draft by Philadelphia. Unanswered questions. Hopefully there's some team chemistry. New offensive coordinator, no A.J. Brown, whatever the problems were. You never know. You don't know when they're winning, but when they're losing, will they start to point fingers? Are they all in with Jalen Hurts? Off-season, I thought, yes. Let's see what happens when the games go on. Right now, I'd say Hurts is kind of in the 12 to 15 range in terms of quarterbacks as far as ranking for me. You may agree or disagree, but he's kind of fallen out of the top 10 range. What's the new ceiling for him? Can he put them over the top? Can he lead these 2-minute drives? He has a lot of weapons at his disposal. Hopefully he can still do that. Team's goal is still NFC title, compete for that. For me, win the East and advance in the playoffs. How far they go, I don't know, but they're still one of the main contenders in the AFC East and NFC East and in the NFC as a whole. They should be a main contender. Right now, we don't see those 11.5s as we did last year. I think that's partly because Brown's out, because there's a lower opinion of Hurts. And I also think there's some nod to the fact that their division rivals got better. So we're seeing 10.5. I lowered it just slightly once Brown was officially out of the building. So to start the year, as they look to Lemon and others to fill that wide receiver 2 role, right now, you'd have to say they're week 1, you'd say they're down at wide receiver. If you're talking about week 12, maybe they've improved at wide receiver, certainly more targets to throw to. And by then, Stowers and company will have given them more depth at tight end. But if we're talking just about week 1, 28 seems about right. Keeping defensive coordinator Fangio, very helpful. I think this is his last year. I think he's going to retire after that. I think they're looking to build, but just to have that continuity 1 more year is important for them. The draft and free agency, this could have been a disaster. This really could have been something that I would have said to you, no, I think Washington and I think Dallas will pass them. I think they did enough to still warrant slight favoritism. It wouldn't shock me if they didn't win the division, but I do expect some schedule fatigue, and I do expect a tight East race. And of any of the 4 teams in this division, if I was to fade one of them, and I'm considering it, it would be Philly, not so much as to what they did or didn't do. It's what their rivals did to make themselves better. Finally, let's talk about the Washington Commanders. Last year, strong run offense, even though it seemed like they didn't have enough people to run the ball, but if you can run by committee, you can get by, you can do some things. Unfortunately, they couldn't get off the field. A weak run D. Their turnover ratio went really bad, -13. That's bad for 2025. If you think it's not contagious, if you think that, oh, they don't have a quarterback who throws a lot of interceptions, or maybe their secondary will be better this year, they'll force more interceptions on the other end, then turnover ratios have a tendency to regress toward the mean. If they have a flat turnover ratio, 3.5 points per turnover, that's not disputable. Then you're talking about 45 points that they can make up just by having a 0 turnover ratio for 2026. So while it was bad last year, I put the stat here now for you to see that that's an edge for next year. And that's what we're all about, trying to find edges. In fact, we're not even talking about the interception ratio. Look at the next line, -9 fumble differential. That's much more random. So I firmly believe that Washington's going to be very close to even, if not have a plus turnover ratio next year. That's going to save them and give them a lot of points. I think immediately that turns the tables. They're not a 5-12 team or a 6-11 team. I think that moves them up. Let's see if they can move up in other areas. Well, special teams, they did care about that. Hopefully that continues. Coaches, Cliff Kingsbury, who puts his quarterbacks in jeopardy, in peril, he's out of the building. I think that's an upgrade on offensive coordinator. And then defensive coordinator, maybe that'll be an upgrade too. So I'm kind of semi-bullish on the coaching changes. Now, as far as the head coach, I don't know if he's the greatest thing, Dan Quinn, since sliced bread. I think he wasn't as good as his 2024 season. And we all knew they would regress with more of a spike in primetime schedule and more tape on Jalen Daniels, the quarterback. But I don't think they were as bad as 2025. I think they're somewhere in the middle. And I think the coaching changes help. They signed 19 free agents, and they didn't sign superstars again, much like Dallas and some other teams, but they signed players that upgraded their roster. There's no question their roster is upgraded. I think, not even counting the draft, they have 5 or 6 new defensive starters. They have more wide receiver depth than they had, and they added much needed running back help. So I think free agency helped them again. Turnover ratio, free agency, we're starting to see a trend. Can that help? 5th toughest schedule. Unlike other teams in this division and throughout all the divisions, they're only going to have one divisional game in the second half of the season. So it would be nice if they hit the ground running, because tiebreakers will be decided by those divisional games. Big change in rest differential. That was another problem with last year and why they were fade material last year. On top of everything else we talked about, schedule bump and the tape on Daniels, they had a negative double-digit rest differential last year. Now it's +9, and the flow in the second half of the season is good. We're talking about another team in this division with a lot of positives. The draft, Sonny Styles, instant starter, linebacker, safest pick in the draft from a defensive standpoint, very good pick. The other holes, not so great. Antonio Williams is a serviceable, maybe tops out as a low-level wide receiver too. I thought there were better available. I like him, but he's more complementary, much like what they already had on the roster. They added an edge, they added a center, they added a running back, but a lot of holes not quite filled, I think. So, especially at cornerback. I thought they could have done better in the draft. If you want to rate the draft classes in this division with all their fantastic gains in other areas, this would have been my 4th best or last draft in the NFC East. On the other hand, Sonny Styles is an instant starter and contributor. Unanswered question: how much does Dan Quinn move the win needle? For somebody like me who tends to bet, such as last year, 9 season win unders and only 2 season win overs, and that's pretty much par for the course. Dan Quinn doesn't move the win needle enough. He needs a lot of things to happen around him. But I don't think he's a bad coach. I don't think it was as bad as last year. But I need to answer that question. How much does he move the win needle? Will cornerback efficiency set them back? It's a pass-driven league. No matter what people say, pass defense matters. I thought they could have done a better job at cornerback. Those are and they're good, but kind of situation. I think the team has lofty goals, comfortably making the playoffs and maybe even winning the East. Remember, last year at this time, Washington was talked about even over Dallas as a contender to Philadelphia. This year at this time, Washington is not thought that way. They're thought as a third or even fourth best team, as we'll see with their win total. I have a little worry about the staff, but I do think the coordinator positions are upgraded. But I also think that the goal should be comfortably in the playoffs. Win total was 7.5, pretty flat, -120s are what I've seen. I think that's a doable win total. I have them as a power rating team as 26, which translates to probably about 8.75 wins. My win grid, it doesn't have them winning the division by any means, but it has them at 8 wins, which is above the 7.5 flat. I was hoping it had them at 9 wins. We'll see. I do the win grid again right before the season. I do it at the end of May. There are no other data points, as I've said all along right now. Nothing's going to change until the end of August, and we see what's going on. And I'll do the win grid one more time at that point. But I am bullish on Washington. I expect that -13 turnover ratio to improve. I think having Daniels back, and if he's anywhere close to what he did as a rookie, that's going to be help. A lot of toss-up games on the schedule. I like the fact that they had a decent special team unit last year. That helps sway toss-up games. Again, we'll see what happens in terms of the coaching, late game coaching, whether or not Dan Quinn has what it takes to get them to win the division. 7.5 is a low enough number. They could win 8 or 9 games, not win the division by any means, still finish third and cover their win total. But at 525 to win the division, there may still be a little bit of value for that. You might catch lightning in a bottle if Daniels can stay healthy all season long. So basically, that's what we have for the NFC East. I am back next Tuesday, July 21st, with another NFC preview. Hope you enjoyed this one. Again, very bullish on the NFC. Not like last year when I would have said, fade them, fade them, fade them. I like Washington, maybe the best of the 4 in terms of their value. I'm still looking to see, and I'll be looking at the chemistry and what goes on with the new offensive coordinator with Philly to determine whether or not I want to fade them. That's all I have for today. Have a great rest of weekend. If you have any questions whatsoever, put them in the YouTube. Russell's here with me. Thanks, Russell. No questions from you, but always glad to see you in on this. Pass the word around. I hope you enjoyed the preview of the NFC East, and I'll see you next week.